Hey all, hope all is well. This is another video in the Road to Grandmaster series. And in this one, I'm going to go over my round 3 game from the 2019 Marshall Championship. Now, before I go into the game, I actually want to just say a few words about something else that happened in the past few days that was kind of near and dear to my heart. As many of you may know, Kobe Bryant passed away in a horrible, horrible tragedy on Sunday, and for anyone that knows anything about me, they know that basketball has been just as important to me as chess over the years. I basically took up basketball and chess in conjunction, kind of at the same time when I was 5, and basketball just means a whole lot to me. And when I heard the news, I was devastated. Well, I was more than devastated. I was crying my eyes out for a few days. I was just completely shaken, and of course, my heart goes out to the Bryant family. But it was also just another, wake up call and reminder of just how precious life really is. And I just kind of wanted to, obviously offer my condolences, but also, in this tragedy, it kind of, serves as a reminder that we can all be living our lives more meaningfully, because we don't really know when our time will come. And so, hug the ones that you love, love the ones that you love, and it's such a cliche, but I'm not going to say, go out here and make every day count or something like that, although you should. I'm just going to say, you should really be doing the things that you're really passionate about, because you don't know, again, when your time is going to come. And yeah, it just really shook me up. And, as a chess player, coming up as an African-American player, there isn't anyone in chess that looks like me. So, as much as you might say there are a bunch of great chess players you could draw inspiration from, I didn't really have like chess heroes, so to speak. My heroes came elsewhere, and I tried to fuel that energy into chess. And one of my heroes was Kobe Bryant. I mean, Kobe to me is kind of like a verb. His name is kind of like a verb, and to me it means like to persist, to fight, to keep going. And I hope that when you see games on the channel that I show, you can kind of see that energy that I'm trying to kind of convey and put across, and essentially just trying to get better all the time, because it's that kind of dogged persistence that can sometimes really be all of the difference. And I've obviously faced my share of adversity on this journey, but Kobe has been a constant inspiration, and I think his passing is honestly, kicked my vigor into another gear, because I think about what he would do, and he would keep going, and he would he would just be a really tough dude. So I'm still have a heavy heart. I'm not fully recovered from what transpired this weekend, but I really cannot recall any type of death and really that shook me up like this. I've definitely been blessed to not have a lot of terrible things happen, but this really, really hurts. So anyways, let me move off of that subject. I just wanted to kind of put that energy out there, because I think it's important to kind of share. And it's honestly a bit cathartic for me to kind of just talk about it, just to talk about some of these things sometimes, instead of just, keeping it to yourself. So anyways, back to the chess. My opponent in this one was International Master Raven Sturt. And, in round 2, I'd actually lost the game against Hedon Stingramson. Was not a really great effort. I deviated from a line that I knew well because I was afraid of his preparation. And I unfortunately just didn't get a good position out of the opening. So I was hoping to play a little bit better in this one. And Raven is someone that was actually I've known for many, many years, over 10 years. He was actually the person that encouraged me to, get a membership to the Marshall and play at the Marshall as a teenager. So I definitely am familiar with him. I'm familiar with his chess, and he's made great strides in the past few years. I believe he does not yet have a Grandmaster norm, but his FIDE rating is actually remarkably high. It's I believe at the time of the game it was around 2460 or 2470, and so rating is just as hard as the norm sometimes, and he's definitely proven to keep the rating. So he's showing some good consistency in the past year, and always a tough challenge. So without further ado, let me get into it. So I was white and Raven was black, and I think Raven actually kind of knew before the game that because we were so familiar with one another, he was going to need to try and do something a little bit different to throw me off. And I wasn't really sure what he was going to play, but I kind of figured he would try to throw me off in some way. And after I opened with d4, which is the typical move that I opened with white, he actually played the move f5. And already on move 1, I have a little bit of a shocker because the Dutch is not an opening you see very much at our level and above. So a bit of a shocker to play f5. I don't believe I'd played against a Dutch for maybe over a year. So definitely an interesting test. And the question is, well, when you're surprised on move 1, how do you react? Obviously, there are lines in the Dutch where you can basically just play c4 and then fianchetto your kingside bishop. But I wasn't super enthusiastic about that because it was kind of just, it's a little bit too mechanical, and I think it's something that he might have been relatively prepared for. So instead, I actually played the move knight c3, which is a sideline within, an opening sideline, if you will, because it's not the main move, but it's almost like an anti-Dutch setup. And the idea is actually just to play for e4 as quickly as possible. Because if you think about it, this f5 move weakens this diagonal, the f7, a2 diagonal, and the e8, h5 diagonal. And so if I'm able to open the center quickly, I could take advantage of black's king. So after f5, Raven played the move knight f6, guarding that square. And there are actually some gambits connected to e4 anyway, but instead I played the move bishop g5. And the idea here is that in some positions I'm threatening e4 once again because I may take on f6 and then play e4. And you might say, well, isn't the bishop pair a significant thing and you shouldn't give it up? Well, the point is that if I'm able to get in e4 and open the position, the nature of the weakness on the diagonals that I showed before will actually start to tell, and the bishop pair wouldn't be such a huge deal, particularly when I have a light squared bishop to take advantage of these weak light squared diagonals. So anyways, after bishop g5, Raven played the move d5, and this is actually the main move in this line. And this is kind of what I was angling for in some way, because essentially when you play the move d5, e5 is a weak square for the near foreseeable future. It cannot be covered by a black pawn again. And I was kind of keen on taking advantage of that. Now, the flip side is that this knight on c3 now is actually misplaced. It can't really dive forward in the center in any reasonable way. And typically in non-e4 openings, you don't want to put your knight in front of the c pawn. Because normally the action is on the c and d files. So essentially going for this setup has its strengths and its weaknesses for both sides. I secure a square, but my knight's misplaced. Anyways, after d5, I played the move e3, which is not the most popular move in this system. Typically, bishop takes f6 is the move, and it almost has features similar to a Sicilian Rossolimo structure, where you're giving up your bishop to double black's pawns. And almost paradoxically, black actually captures away from the center, just like in the Rossolimo, actually. The point is, if you play g takes f6, this diagonal is way too weak, and I think a move like e4 and queen h5 check is just decisive, or at least close to it. So because of that, you have to take with the e-pawn. And then, actually, double pawns cover squares. So even though you might say, well, aren't these pawns weak? And, that's what white is trying to say. They actually cover important central squares. The knights, my knights can't feature prominently in the middle. And if black does manage to consolidate his position, he does have the bishop pair. So something along the lines of e3, bishop e6, bishop d3, knight c6, and something like h4 might be an idea for white to kind of play toward targeting the f5 pawn. But, black, again, has their own trumps based upon the fact they have the two bishops. You might say, why are you putting the black knight on c6 in front of the c pawn? Didn't you just say you don't want to put your knight in front of the c pawn in these types of openings? Well, part of the reason that knight c6 is actually useful is because in some lines, knight b4 is an idea, trying to get that bishop on d3. And the other thing is, you don't want to rush with c5 in this type of structure, because here white can play d takes c5, and then the d5 pawn could be isolated and weak. So black has to be a little bit careful with pawn breaks until he's completely consolidated, because he already has a few weaknesses. So that was kind of like a potential line that could happen with bishop takes f6. I was not keen on giving up the bishop pair so quickly because I didn't believe that there was something concrete enough to justify that. So I went for the move e3 instead. After e3, black played e6, just developing, just trying to get this bishop out and, still fortifying this stonewall type of structure. And it does remind more of a stonewall now than any other type of Dutch, because and that's one of the things I really did like about this, because there was the option a bit earlier for Raven to actually go for a Leningrad. So if I went for g3, knight f6, bishop g2, g6, these type of positions where the bishop fianchettos and then this pawn actually winds up going to d6 are actually, I think, quite legitimate for black. And I think the Leningrad is actually a better version of the Dutch than the stonewall is. Now, it's definitely a matter of taste and opinion, but I was actually quite glad to play against a stonewall rather than a Leningrad, because I think in the stonewall you actually create more chronic weaknesses, particularly on these dark squares like e5. So anyways, after e3, e6, I played knight f3, just developing. Black played bishop e7, and I went for bishop f4. And bishop f4 at first sight just seems really, really puzzling. Like, why are you voluntarily moving the bishop back to f4 unprompted to this diagonal? Well, there was a little bit of a method to the madness. One idea was that, again, this knight on c3 that's quite misplaced all the time, I thought could be an asset if I played knight b5. And so the point was, by putting the bishop on this diagonal, I thought knight b5 might be a legitimate threat. And let's say black castles. Well, now if knight b5, the c7 pawn is sensitive. Really, you need to guard that, I believe, with knight a6 to cover that square. And now I could entertain a move like c4, and all of a sudden, the knight is actually not in the way of the c-pawn advancing. And so I thought that would be an interesting idea. Another idea I thought was just... Well, that was the main idea, but another idea I thought was that in some lines with bishop f4, I might be able to entertain a pawn sacrifice with h3 and g4, and I wanted the option in some of those lines to be able to go knight g5. So it seems a little bit far-fetched, but just to give you a sample dummy line, let's say castles, h3, c6, or let's say c6, just to show my point, bishop d3, b6, and g4. All of a sudden, there could be some ideas on the H file with the H7 pawn, and then also there's sometimes knight G5 as an idea, uncovering the knight on G4, getting my queen into the game, and so it was these types of circumstances where I thought having the bishop on F4, getting out of the way of the G file, I thought could be an interesting idea. Now, there were other ideas here. I could have gone for g3. That would be an interesting move, trying to, basically almost shift back towards Leningrad structures. Stonewall structures where I fianchetto my bishop, move my knight away from c3, and then play c4. I also could entertain knight e2 right away, and after c5, knight f4. So there were a few different ways I could play the position, but I went for bishop f4, which is quite unusual and probably not best, but an interesting try. Raven now actually did respect the knight b5 idea and played the move a6, which is actually a pretty good prophylactic move that is actually not a waste of time, because in many lines, not only are you covering b5 for the knight, but you're actually kind of preparing to expand sometimes with b5 later. So playing a6 is actually a very good prophylactic move. And now I also have to worry about c5 as an idea because, again, this knight is really short on squares towards the middle of the board. So after a6, I went h3. Again, another kind of strange-looking waiting move. Excuse me. I'm coughing there. I'm going to take a sip of tea real quick. But the point with h3, it was kind of in conjunction with the other idea I had with bishop f4, which was this g4 idea. So that was kind of my idea, was playing for g4. I wasn't really keen on castling kingside right away, but trying to expand. Black now went c5, trying to open up the center and take advantage, I think, of this knight being on c3. And, Black is actually playing very aggressively, trying to take more space and so on. And here after c5, I now went g4. And so we both kind of have our own little trumps or initiatives, you could say. Black is trying to undermine my center, and I'm trying to play on the flank a little bit to kind of shake up Black's king side because I thought that Black would feel less encouraged about going this way if I can play g takes f5 and rook g1 and generate pressure on the g file. After g4, Black actually went c4, and this actually was quite a surprise for me. I thought that it would be a little bit smarter to keep the tension in the position, so I thought a move like knight c6 would be more viable. I even thought castles was playable, but c4 I thought was a little bit strategically risky because even though it appears that Black is really playing, for quite a decent pawn storm on the queen side and is taking up all that space, I thought surely there could be some way for me to generate pressure on the king side. And so I was a little bit surprised by that move. But the more I looked at the position, the more I thought that this actually is becoming a serious race, and I wasn't sure who was winning it. And so I thought for quite some time here trying to figure out what was the best way to go forward because I felt like I need to get something going on the king side. And the question was, do I take on f5 or do I play g5? After long consideration, I actually played the move g5. And it might seem like I'm just closing the position, but I thought the reason this was better than g takes f5 is because I couldn't really see enough counterplay on the g file. I thought like if rook g1, well, I don't know if castles right away is effective, but I just didn't see anything. I didn't see anything long-term. I didn't see anything long-term basically that would, hassle white Black here. Of course, maybe castling right away runs into bishop h6. But yeah, I just was really unsure about the circumstances of this position. So instead, I thought g5 made a little bit more sense because it gave me a little bit more flexibility. I thought that in some lines I might be able to play for advancing the h-pawn. I thought that in some lines I might be able to sack a pawn with g6 to open up the g-file if Black decided to castle. And really, I thought that if knight e4 came, I'd be able to take on e4 and get rid of this problem knight on c3, which was bothering me quite a bit. And then if like d takes e4, knight e5, I thought I'd have really good outposts for my pieces, particularly my knight on e5 and bishop on f4. And bishop takes g5 is not possible because of queen h5 check picking up a piece. So I thought g5 was a pretty reasonable move, just taking up space. But here, Raven actually played the move knight fd7. And this move I hadn't really strongly considered, but it really, really made me think even longer than I had on the previous move because I wasn't sure how to handle this position. One of the things that concerned me now was that I thought that my space gaining move with g5 was very intelligent, but if I just continue to play h4 and h5, I thought that maybe Black could just juke me however I decided to push. So if I decided to play h6, I thought Black might play g6, and if I decide to play g6, then Black could play h6. And I was thinking, how in the world am I going to pierce the Black king side if he goes for castling? So that kind of bothered me. And I was thinking, well, maybe I'll have some sacrifices. Maybe I'll be able to sack on f8, sack on h6 with my bishop on f4, no problem. But I just wasn't completely sure. And this really, was not great for me because I thought that, black is actually quite fast with b5 and b4, and it really honestly reminded me of these lines in the classical French where, black has closed the position with c4 and is playing b5, b4, very, very quickly getting counterplay on the queen side. The other thing I thought about is maybe some sacrifices in the center might be appealing, but it didn't seem like there was enough time for them. If I could somehow get like bishop g2 and then maybe 3 pawns for the piece with a sack on d5, I thought that might be attractive, but it just didn't seem like it was, coming together. So after knight d7, I just played the move h4, reinforcing my g5 pawn and kind of keeping my options open. Raven now went for knight c6, just developing, and I think this is a good move, playing it before b5 because you also, cover the e5 square again, and so this, potential outpost that I was raving about a bit earlier in the game is no longer as significant because if I put a knight on e5, Raven would, happily trade, and a position like this, I believe, is just better for black because the quote-unquote weak square is now occupied by a pawn, not to mention the fact that I'm just down the bishop pair. So this type of thing where black could go queen c7 or b5, put this bishop on b7, will bode very nicely for black. So instead, I just played the move a4. And my idea here was to kind of at least try to restrain the b5 break just a little bit, recognizing full well that I probably couldn't stop it forever. And it's a kind of funny position to actually study because when I turned on my engine, the engine is actually giving white a really massive advantage before the move a4. It's actually saying that white is, close to +1 when you let it run for a little while. But, the longer you let it run, I think the more it goes down. And the other problem is that it doesn't actually come up with a really concrete plan. And this is one of the issues you have when you analyze positions with the engine that are closed, is that the horizon effect of the computer, which is kind of this idea that it doesn't actually see far enough to truly understand the conclusion of the position or the ultimate evaluation of the position until it's too late, means that sometimes it's going to be a poor judge of closed positions. And so I really, will take these evaluations with a grain of salt in the closed position. But the computer was advocating for bishop g2, castles, and actually king f1. And the idea was, I think, to keep the rook on the h-file and to generate some counterplay. But I really don't know. I really don't buy this because essentially after b5, knight e2, and knight b6, even though it seems like I have a lot of space on the king side and it looks nice, the question is, how does white go forward? And if there's no clear path forward, black is going to very clearly encroach further on the queen side and make serious gains there, whether it's preparing for an a3 break or c3 break. It's just something I have to be worried about. And I just was not so comfortable playing like this. So instead, I just played a4, which is, I think, a little bit more of a human move. Raven now played bishop b4, taking advantage of the weakness created by a4 on the b4 square and nestling in that bishop on b4 where it's actually pinning the knight on c3. And while this is a very active move, I'm actually not a huge fan of it because I think black should have tried to continue with this b5 plan, probably by going b6 and bishop b7 and then playing b5. The point is you can't go b5 right away because the rook on a8 is protected. So just, it would be a little bit slow, but I don't think there's really any way I can, take advantage of that on the king side. The problem with bishop b4 is that even though you are, pinning this knight on c3, I have my, doubts about whether or not you really actually want to take this because you'd be giving up your bishop for the knight, and there's a ton of weak dark squares in black's camp. And so the bishop actually might just get in the way of the pawn advancing, the b pawn advancing. So anyways, after bishop b4, I just played bishop g2 and ignored this concept and this pressure on c3. And here, Raven decided to play queen e7. And I think this in some ways kind of admits that maybe bishop b4 was not exactly the greatest thing, because really, if you want to be super principled about it, you might consider a move like queen a5. But the point is, even here, I would probably just castle. And the point is that if you go for this pawn, it doesn't seem like the best idea. It seems like white is going to have really good compensation for the pawn deficit with this monster dark squared bishop, and I could consider a move like bishop d6, for instance, which just stops black from castling for the time being. So I think that white would actually retain quite a decent advantage if you went for this knight and tried to win a pawn. So instead, Raven was a bit more restrained with queen e7. And now I actually decided to castle. And again, it's one of these funny positions where the computer actually believes that I shouldn't castle. It believes I should play knight d2, and then after black castles, play queen f3 and keep the rook on the h-file. But I just could not see a way to break through on h6 or g6 because I just thought the black pawns would juke me. So instead, I just castled, and black castled as well. And my point is to try and play this position a little bit more positionally than just to attack. And the point was I thought maybe my dark squares here my dark square control would really be a really strong asset for me, connected with my space advantage. So even though you might say, well, aren't these pawns very advanced and make your king vulnerable? I would say no, because I have all these minor pieces around my king, and it actually gives me a lot of space to operate with, which could be an asset later on. So after castles now, really the last kind of thing I got to do is connect my rooks. And then after I connect my rooks, I thought I could facilitate a pawn break. And so in this position, I played the move knight e2. And the point was now is that I really wanted to, essentially prepare some type of pawn break to open up the queen side for me, because everything from the D to the H file is kind of shut down for now. And so I have good control over there, and I need to try and open up the flanks on the queen side. Black now went b6, I think trying to do something similar, essentially connecting the rooks, developing the bishop. And I now went for b3, trying to open up the position before black was ready to kind of, reinforce the c4 pawn. Because if this bishop was already on b7, black would be able to play b5, and then I wouldn't be able to shake the tree, or basically shake the foundation of this pawn chain. And so really, really important to play b3 so I can undermine the chain right away. Instead, though, the computers actually advocate for c3, and I think it's actually quite instructive why they think this is strong, because I was concerned about the bishop retreating, and then after capturing, I was a little bit wary of playing b3 or b4 now, because I thought after en passant, there was this move knight a5. And what I was worried about here was having this weak backward c-pawn that wouldn't be able to be pushed because of the knight on c4. It turns out here that I actually can play queen b4, and the point is that, right now, black is actually kind of in a pickle, because if the queens come off the board, my knights will have wonderful dark squares on e5 and f4 to operate with, and one can actually argue that the c-pawn that, I claimed was weak and backward is no weaker than the black b-pawn, the b6 pawn. And so basically, this queen b4 move is actually really strong and gives white a nice, healthy plus. So that would have been a better way to go about it, but I had a similar idea with b3 that I would be opening up the queen side. So after b3, black actually took, and I actually played c takes b3, which seems automatic, but again, the computer always tries to point out these little differences. And here, actually, c3 is the best move, almost transposing back to the line I just showed with bishop d6, because we basically would have the same story here with queen b4. Now, the difference here is, well, now after c3, black can actually throw in the intermediate move b2, but actually doesn't really change the story very much, because I can go rook a2, and if bishop d6 back, I just take and then play knight f4, And this b2 pawn is just going to be a goner, so it's not, any big deal for me. And if black was to play bishop a3, I have queen b3. And essentially this bishop is surrounded, and I will also pick up the pawn. So, yeah, a very unique intermediate move, but something that was a good one in this case. But instead, I actually just captured on b3. And, this is basically what happened. Here, after c takes b3, Raven actually played bishop b7, connecting the rooks. And, black's connected the rooks first, which means that they're going to be able to, challenge on the c file really effectively. And the challenge for me is how to actually contest the c file while also dealing with my, potentially weak b3 pawn, because it's actually more of a target than black's queenside pawns for the moment. And so even though I have this really awesome control from the d file to the h file, I do need to try and consolidate on the queen side to really make it matter. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I started with the move knight c1, and essentially my idea here was to reposition this knight on e2, which was not so great, to the d3 square, from which it challenges the bishop on b4 and also is another piece eyeing the e5 square. And I thought that was a nice maneuver. It turns out that rook a2 is actually another way you can do this, but I think this would be difficult to play. The point is that after rook a c8, I actually would have to go queen a1. Very, very unusual. But the point is that now I'm ready to go rook c1 and then rook a c2 and double rooks that way. And my queen on a1 actually has the benefit of covering the a3 square so that bishop a3 hitting my rook on c1 doesn't happen right away. And my gosh, that's a very, very unique line. But the point is that if a5, rook c1, bishop a6, and rook c2, and you can see here the rooks managed to double. My queen's actually doing a decent job on a1, and the knight on c6 is attacked. So it actually turns out that white can actually control the file. Instead, my way temporarily ceded the file to black with this knight c1 idea, because now after bishop c3, my rook is very awkward, and my rooks are actually split, and it's going to be difficult to actually properly coordinate. After bishop c3, I played the move rook b1 because rook a2 now is kind of out of the question because of knight b4, and you can see here that black's minor pieces do an excellent job of controlling really all the business squares on the second rank. So instead, I had to go rook b1. And now rook fc8 was played. And I must say here, in this position, I was actually getting very, very concerned because I was pinning my hopes on this knight coming to d3 and having control on e5. But it seemed at this moment that black was winning the battle on the queen side. The rook is already on the c file. This bishop is cutting my rook on b1 very annoyingly. This knight on c6 can jump to b4. And in some lines, I actually thought this queen on e7 could actually go to a3 and wreak some havoc there. And then there's also this idea of a5 and bishop a6 getting the light squared bishop into the game. So I figured I had to be really, really fast here to not just get strategically run over on the queen side. And so here I shifted gears a little bit and played the move knight a2. And again, this was not the original intent of this knight e2 maneuver, knight c1. Again, I was probably trying to go to d3, but I thought a2 was now kind of a necessity because I really did need to, cause this bishop some problems and try to get it off the board. Black now went knight b4, and here's actually a very, very interesting moment because Raven seems to be offering up the bishop, but actually in return getting the file, getting the c file, and I really had a hard time deciding whether it was worth it to capture. I wound up playing queen e2 because I figured that this one was just simply too dangerous to go for, and I thought it was a bit safer to just connect my rooks. What I was looking at was a position like knight takes e3, rook takes e3, and if I go queen d2, I thought rook c2 is actually extremely annoying, because now my queen has to go back to the first rank, and then black just doubles the rooks, and it just seemed very, very difficult to untangle here and to evict this c2 rook. I know I do have knight e1 here, but it just seemed very awkward. And black also has the option of playing a5 again, with this idea of going bishop a6 and hitting the rook on f1. And so I just figured right now, I'm not so sure the two bishops are as significant an asset as they normally are. So instead, I played the safer choice, I believe, which was queen e2, just essentially connecting my rooks, covering the a2 knight, and still giving myself the opportunity to play knight takes c3 if I want. But this time, I'd be able to play rook c1, and my rooks would be connected. So after queen e2, knight takes a2 was played, and I played queen takes a2. And now I actually felt a little bit better. I kind of breathed a sigh of relief here, because now my rooks are connected, and I thought that I'd be able to contest on c1. And with my queen on a2, I kind of put an end to these queen a3 ideas that were, bothering me. So after queen a2, black actually played a5, and here I played the move rook fc1. And it seemed to me here that I'm just really nicely consolidating now, because now bishop a6, which was going to be kind of painful for me, can be just met with bishop f1, just trading off those bishops. And it seemed this knight on d7 now is actually not very good, because it doesn't have any squares to go to, so it's actually going to be quite weak. And if I'm able to just double rooks, all of a sudden this bishop on c3 will not be very comfortable. So Raven played the move bishop a6, but I now very quickly and confidently played bishop f1, kind of thinking that this trade would just be great for me. And here, Raven actually played the move bishop takes a6, bishop takes f1. And after king takes f1, I felt that, you know what, I still have this amazing control on the c file. My rooks are connected. I'm prepared to double. And I think white is actually massively better. And one of the other issues now is that because the light squared bishops are gone and black's pawns are actually fixed on dark squares, there's some ideas now of my queen actually very quickly relocating to the b5 square via e2. And all of a sudden, these endgames will be extremely unpleasant, because these pawns will be targets for my dark squared bishop, whereas this bishop on c3 doesn't really have any targets and is essentially just caught in the cookie jar. After king f1, black played the move queen e8, I believe in some lines shifting the queen over to h5, from where my knight would actually be under fire, and if I move the knight, the h4 pawn would be under fire, and I have to be a little bit careful about that. So I now played the move queen e2, and I like this move because it was consistent with what my idea was to go to b5, but I'm also now covering the f3 knight. And here, Raven played a move that really is almost unexplainable. Just an inexplicable move, a very, very poor decision. He just simply blundered here and did not calculate. And I think in part it's because his position already is actually not very good anymore. But really it's hard to explain, particularly at our level, how you can make this type of mistake. And he played the move e5. Now, e5 is just simply a blunder, and you're going to see why in a moment. So before I, show you what actually happened, I'll just show you a few other moves that are playable. Instead, the move bishop b4 made some sense, just, moving that bishop out the way, contesting on the c file. And I think white here is still massively better. I mean, I could go queen b5, and here I'm, pinning this knight on d7. I have great control of the c file, and all these endgames are just amazing for white because of the weakness of black's queenside pawns, and also just the lack of access to squares in the center, while white has this really nice outpost on e5. So white is still, I would say, nearly strategically winning here, but at least black's not material down. Another way to try to play the position would be to go queen h5. At least you retain some pressure on my kingside pawns. Again, white is a lot better here. I could just go rook c2 and after bishop b4, double rooks. And an exchange here means that white has the open file and, still, dominant position as far as space is concerned. But again, the material is equal and it's not over yet. Instead, the move e5 just blunders a pawn. And unfortunately for Raven, what he missed was that after knight takes e5, knight takes, and bishop takes, which I actually played, this bishop on c3 is actually not able to participate / recapture on e5. So it actually makes no sense whatsoever to do this, and white is just up a pawn. And to add insult to injury, that e6 pawn that was pushed to e5 was actually the base of black's pawn chain, stonewall type of pawn chain in the center. So now both d5 and f5 are targets, and this bishop on e5 is just a massive, massive piece. So white is just winning here, and the conversion should be, relatively straightforward. Just a huge, huge mistake from Raven. After bishop takes e5, Raven played rook c6 now, recognizing his mistake and essentially trying to double rooks quickly to try and contest on the c file. If there's one thing that Raven does have going for him here is that my light squares are a little bit weak on the king side now and in the center. So I do have to keep an eye on them with my queen. And if I don't, I might get into a little bit of trouble. And so after rook c6, I played the move queen d3, moving my queen away from this h5 diagonal because I thought it was important to put pressure on this c3 bishop, and I kind of judged that I can also get the f5 pawn, and so I thought that, wow, if I win 2 pawns, strategically, this should just be massive advantage. So after queen d3, rook ac8 was played. Note that if you move the bishop away, now I'll just take, I can take on c6, but I can also even take on f5 right away, and it's just winning for white. And so rook ac8 was played. And here I think I made a move that, practically speaking, is not a great decision. Now, the position is winning after this move, but it almost reminds me of my game against Farai Mendiza in the last round of the Delugi tournament I showed last week. And essentially, the best move in my opinion, the calmest move, is just to play rook c2. I'm already a pawn up in this position. My bishop is on a dominant outpost, and if I double my rooks, or actually trade all the rooks, all these endgames are going to be losing for black because of the pawns being fixed on dark squares on the queen side. And so I shouldn't really be concerned with material. I should be really more concerned with consolidation. And so rook c2 just makes a whole lot of sense, because if bishop b4, I go rook bc1. And this type of ending now is just, again, totally winning. The queen can't stray far from the nest because then my queen infiltrates. And a position like this is just completely lost. I'll just pick up a second pawn quite quickly, and then that's it. Instead, though, I made a very, very puzzling decision to actually take a second pawn. And really, this pawn was more trouble than it was worth, simply put. It was really just a not great decision. And even though the computer evaluates this position as winning, all of a sudden, there's actually a lot of counterplay here, because I'm not actually able to control the C file anymore. And that, coupled with the fact that I still have these weak light squares, is not so great. The other thing is that in some lines, maybe the F file can be of use to one of black's rooks. So really just a poor decision all the way around going for that pawn. So even though I'm 2 pawns up and winning, it becomes a little bit tricky here. Raven played bishop b4, now taking advantage of the fact that I'm not able to control the C file. Note that now doubling on c2 is just not possible because it's just hanging, and it all of a sudden just becomes kind of difficult to play. I took on c6, at least just trying to trade, but after queen takes e6, the same problem exists. There's black that has control of the one open file, and now the rook on c8 can sometimes swing over to f8 with a really, really annoying counterplay. So very, very frustrating position now to play when both of us were kind of nearing a time scramble. After queen c6, I played the move king g2. I thought prophylaxis was in order. I need to get my king tucked away, get it off the f-file, try to hold things together. And after rook f8, naturally challenging my queen, I now had a tough decision to make about which diagonal to go to, because if I retreat towards this way, of course I'm controlling some squares around my king, but then I cede the c2 square, and all of a sudden the rook on f8, the queen on c2, very, very nasty threats. So I had to go queen d3, I thought, backing up there. But now Raven played the move queen e6. And all of a sudden here, my rook on b1 is not really playing at all. This queen is threatening to infiltrate. Even the bishop on b4 can participate in the initiative because of bishop d6. If I tried to block the check with my bishop, all of a sudden there's counterplay there. And my king is actually remarkably airy. And my queen also is not very close to the king right now. It's kind of being cut off by my own pawn. And so this position now became murky. A position that was completely winning became murky. And it's really just poor conversion on my part. I thought for some time you're trying to just figure out what's the simplest way out. And I played the move f3, which turns out to be the best move, but not a move you want to make because you weaken the second rank. You also weaken your pawn chain because f2 was the base of that chain. And but it was the only way I could cover the g4 square. So now that I kind of shut down the g4 square and the counterplay on the king side right away, now Raven played rook c8 and very alertly shifted gears towards the c-file, which he still controls. And I need to try and, basically control that. So I played the move rook b2, just trying to shift the rook over to c2, trade those rooks, and convert. But I knew full well that I wouldn't be allowed this opportunity. And very quickly, Raven played the move rook c3, not giving me the opportunity to play rook c2. Now, it turns out, instead of rook b2, there was actually a move that was better and a cleaner win, and it's the move e4. Kind of a move that's difficult to make under time trouble. But the point is, after rook c3, queen a6, my queen actually is able to stray far from the nest because there's no immediate checks here on my king that cause me any problems. And I'm actually threatening queen a8 and queen takes d5, or in some lines, queen a8, queen b7, and queen takes g7. And so because you have to deal with those checks, black's actually not in a position to kind of keep attacking me. And one sample line, it goes after d takes e4, which seems the most natural. I can check, go king f7, and then queen takes e4. And my queen actually comes back in time, not only to stop any checks on c2, but also to continue to hassle the black king. And so, with the bishop on e5 here, black would be in massive trouble. But it's very difficult to kind of bring your queen all the way offside, if you will, when it feels like your king is under fire. And so I went for a much safer move that's just not accurate. So after rook b2, rook c3, I played the move queen e2, stepping away. And now black played the move h6, which is a very, interesting move and kind of alert. Pretty much acknowledging that rook c2 is an idea and trying to loosen up my king side before I try to, get that move in. Now, after h6, I actually played rook c2, thinking that, well, I don't mind giving a pawn back if I get my queen really active. And I thought that was kind of the smartest thing to do. But after rook c2, rook takes b3 was played. And you could see here now that I did wind up giving up a pawn on b3. I thought I was the g5 pawn was also the loose pawn. But he actually thought, I'm going to take this pawn on b3. I'm going to keep the pressure on the third rank, maybe even invade on the second rank. And I'm going to make you prove that getting the c-file was a big deal. because right now the queen is covering the c8 square, and if you go to c7, trying to get rook takes g7, the bishop can pop back to f8 and defend. And so he's kind of saying, show me the money, show me the knockout blow, because I don't really see it. Now, there is a knockout blow. White is winning here, but again, it requires a little bit of aggression and precision that I really was not kind of up for here. I thought I should still be kind of consolidating, and consolidating actually gives black an opportunity to, generate more threats. So I play the move g takes h6, thinking that, taking a pawn around the king maybe makes black's king a little bit more open. And I was just worried about the light squares being a little bit weak if I allowed him to play h takes g5. But it's just a mistake. And instead, again, the move e4 is the move that needs to be played. The point is that in a lot of these lines, when I play e4, my queen is actually able to step up to e4 and centralize. And after h takes g5, e takes d5, and queen takes d5, I actually have a few checks that are decisive, because if you block with f8 now, after h takes g5, I have several different threats, as I've diagrammed here. I have queen c4 as a threat, trying to trade queens. I have queen c2 as a threat as well. The pin on the bishop on f8 means that the king is pretty much entombed, the black king is, and so queen trades now are very favorable for me. And even the g pawn here can be used as an asset to kind of, almost like a thorn pawn, to keep the king, the black king on g8 locked in a cage. And so there were a lot of opportunities here if I actually play e4 and open up the position. But you can see in large part it's because my queen on e2 all of a sudden has squares and diagonals it didn't have before. Instead, after the move that I played, g takes h6, the position is actually no longer winning for me. And I just missed the mark here. So after g takes h6, Raven played the move queen g6 check, which is a good move. A good intermediate move, causing me to make a tough decision with my my king. And it turns out that the best move is actually king f2. But no matter what I do here, I no longer have a winning position. I actually played the move king h2, which I thought was a little bit safer, because I was worried about, after king f2, bishop e7. I thought that bishop takes h4 is a massive threat. This rook can maybe come from behind and also provide checks if I run to the first rank. And I was just concerned that I could even lose this. And so I thought king h2 was a bit safer. I will show you the king f2 line. If we keep going here, there's this really complicated line where it turns out that at the end of it, I'm actually, slightly better. But I think a lot of these moves that I'm showing here were actually harder to find for white than for black. And again, even at the end of it, I'm not winning. So definitely another reason why king h2 is definitely more of a human move, if you will. So, but yeah, so I went king h2, and now Raven actually played queen takes h6. And it's a very, very annoying position here, because all of a sudden I'm only up a pawn, and I still have two pawns that are actually being attacked. So it just is extremely frustrating that I was not able to convert this properly when my king was, really snug and secure, and now it's just not. Now, I think after queen takes h6, we had a few moves to move 40, and I really was thinking here about just how to not lose the game, because it seemed like it was headed that way. And I thought for a while, and I thought rook c8 check was the best way to do that. Because at least after rook c8 check, I thought, this king has to make a tough decision. And if you go king h7, there's queen c2 check picking off the rook on b3. So I thought it'd be a tough move to kind of make under fire. And in this position, Raven actually blundered. Fortunately, I was able to get back on track. Now, this is move 39, so we get more time at move 40, and so, mistakes can happen near the time control. I mean, you saw my round 1 game against Irina Krush. It turns out here that the best move in the position is actually king f7. I think that's a really, really difficult move to make under the gun. Because the point is that after rook c7, you play bishop e7, and it's actually better to voluntarily pin yourself on the 7th rank rather than on the 8th rank. And the reason for that is because now, with queen takes h4 as an idea, the queen can actually help support the bishop on e7. And also, there's this idea of rook takes e3 in the position as well. And so black has 2 threats here, and it's really difficult for me to deal with both of them and hold everything together. So this would have been a better move, and black would have been able to secure a quality here eventually with precise defense. Instead, remarkably, after the move bishop f8, the position is actually losing. And part of the reason for this is that with the bishop on f8, the king is actually more entombed, and there's some tactical problems that you'll see in just a moment connected with my next move, which was queen f2. And remarkably, after queen f2, this position is pretty much lost because all of a sudden, these pawns that were targets on e3 and h4 really can't be won cleanly. The first problem is that if you play queen takes e3, I can actually just trade and play bishop d6, and I just win a piece. And so you can't actually really take on e3 very cleanly with the queen. And then the other problem is that in some lines, when I shift my queen over to g3, the queen on h6 is actually paralyzed because I have this threat of queen takes g7 mate all the time because the rook is pinning the bishop on f8. And so remarkably, this really weird creeper move, queen f2, really throws black's position and downhill. And this bishop on e5 is so strong that it's just really holding all of black's pieces in a bind. And so after bishop queen f2, black actually only has one chance to try and fight here, and it's actually the move b5. This was the best line, and the point is that after a takes b5, rook takes b5, the rook can try to come back and actually aid a little bit in the defense. But even here, it seems that the position is actually quite difficult to defend, and okay, I'm showing you this sample line. The computer's giving this to be very, very close to losing, if not losing. I didn't let it run long enough, but it was like 1.4 for white. Normally 1.5 is winning, so I really have my reservations about whether black can hold this, especially when I can play rook a6 check. I can take more space with h5. It just seems like a tough position to defend. But it was the best way. Instead of playing b5, though, Raven played the more natural rook takes e3. And the problem here, remarkably, is that I can just play queen g3. And again, even though this pawn e3 is won, the bind here is just so problematic with this bishop being pinned, this queen not able to kind of move away and go to a light square because I have queen takes g7 mate. And with queen g3, I have this little creeper idea of playing queen g4 and then actually queen f5. And if I'm able to step my queen up there, I'm threatening mate on f8. And so it's a very, very strange maneuver. Queen f2, queen g3, but it just, even now with the material finally equal, white is actually just winning. After queen g3, Raven played the move rook d3, but just to show you, rook e2 doesn't really change very much because I can just go king h3, and the story hasn't really been changed very much. If queen at e6 check, I can go queen g4, and even the queen trades here should be winning for white. I can also, yeah, I mean, these positions are probably just winning because if you just trade here, I could take with the f-pawn, but I might even consider taking with the king. And, yeah, just very, very difficult. If you go king f7, trying to stop bishop d6, I can give a check on c7 now and then win the pawn on g7. And if you go to e6, I could check here and then take on b6. Just a really tough position. Instead, though, Raven, didn't find the most tenacious way, and after rook d3, I now went queen g4, and the difference is now you try to check on d2, I can just go to h3 and it's just one check. So if you go queen d2 check, king h3, there are no more effective checks. And again, I'm threatening queen takes g7 mate because of the pin on the bishop. So there's just nothing really going here. And after queen g4, Raven played the move rook d2 check, and I went king h3, and my king is completely snug here. And my next move, if allowed, is to go queen f5, just encroaching further on this pin. Raven now played the move rook f2, eyeing the f3 pawn, but it doesn't really change anything. And I went for the move queen f5, which just threatens mate in 1. Now, it's kind of a little bit embarrassing which happens next because Raven thought for a little while. We had made the control, so there was no time trouble per se, and the position is just lost. But he actually played the move g5 here, and it's kind of embarrassing because I did not find the quickest way to win, and I believe that most of you looking at this video would probably find the best way to play here. So white to play here and win quickly is the task for you right now. All right, hopefully you got a chance to pause the video and figure out the best way forward. I'm really shocked I didn't see this. The best way forward is just rook takes f8. It's actually mate in 3. The point is that there's no squares for the king to go to, and after queen takes f8, queen g6 check, black just has to interpose with the queen, and then I mate on g7. And that's actually just the quickest way. Now, I'd anticipated g5 as a move, but for some reason I did not consider this basic tactic. And so instead, I played the move queen takes g5 check, and here, the game could have gone on a little bit longer, although it is completely lost. Black could have traded queens, taken on f3, and here the material is equal, but it's still completely lost. I would just go king g4, and the issue here is that Black really needs to keep the rook on the f file because I have bishop d6, but even so, if you play like rook f7, it's just lost. I can go g6 and then g7 and just pin. And unfortunately, this pawn on a4 controls 2, so there's no way you can even make a pass pawn on the queen side. So the position is completely lost regardless. But we could have played a few more moves. And instead, after queen takes g5 check, Raven played king h7. And now I played the move rook c7 check. And here, Raven resigned because the king has no squares to go to, and interposing with the bishop will just result in mate in a few after rook takes g7 and queen takes g7 mate. So, anyways, very, very interesting game. I think, again, the Dutch is not an opening you see every day, and so I knew there'd be some interesting dynamic chess. And, it was a game in which I didn't really understand what was going on in the opening, but managed to navigate it to a really promising middle game. Unfortunately, after I won the pawn and got a clearly winning position, my technique was really poor. And I need to, just improve in that area. I mean, you always can improve your technique, but it's kind of shocking because that's usually the good part of my chess. But all in all, I actually managed to throw away the position sufficiently so that Black actually had really great drawing chances. And in the end, I was just able to get a win. I just was able to outlast him a little bit longer. And these moves that I made close to the time control really helped me get back on track. So it was actually quite surprising for me when I discovered that queen f2 and queen g3 was winning, because I did not realize it until we actually, got there that, wow, this actually is a good winning try, and Black is tied up. So yeah, I'll take it. So with this game, I got back on to 50%, and I was hoping to keep the good chess going. So anyways, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Please like and/or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the Road to Grandmaster journey, you could do so by making a donation through the PayPal link in the description below. Thanks again. Take care.